My wife said, "A real man provides for my family." She didn't know that sentence was the moment I stopped paying and let everything collapse. My name is Daniel, 33, and for most of my adult life I believed stability came from working hard, staying quiet, and keeping the peace. I work in IT, make decent money, not rich but comfortable. When I married Sarah 3 years ago, I truly thought I was building a life with someone who saw the world the same way. But the thing about family dynamics is this: you never really know who you married until you meet the people who shaped them. Sarah's family was the type I used to think only existed in exaggerated online stories until I became one of those stories myself. Her father jumped from job to job, always finding a reason to quit after a few months. Her mother spent money like it grew on a tree nobody else had access to. And her younger brother, Ethan, 25, treated adulthood as an optional lifestyle. Before the wedding, I shrugged it off. Everyone has flaws. Everyone has struggles. It wasn't my place to judge. I was wrong. Very wrong. After we got married, the first favor came only 2 months later. Sarah's mother needed a small loan for a medical bill. A few $100s. Sarah looked at me with this hopeful, pleading expression, and I told myself it was harmless. Helping my wife's family once wasn't going to kill me. But a one-time favor quickly became a monthly pattern. A few hundred turned into 1,000. 1,000 turned into several thousand. Borrowing became expecting, and expecting became Daniel will handle it. Then came Ethan, the king of financial emergencies. Lost jobs, broken cars, failed investments, unpaid rent. Random crises appearing like he had a subscription service for disaster. And every time, Sarah looked at me like I was the designated fixer. Year 1, I spent around $12,000 helping her family. Year 2, nearly $20,000. Year 3, I stopped keeping count because the numbers made me nauseous. Whenever I tried to talk to Sarah about boundaries, I always got the same answer. They're my family. I can't just abandon them. But what I eventually realized was this: she wasn't asking herself whether we as a married couple could afford it. She wasn't thinking about our goals, our savings, our future. Her priorities started and ended with them. Then, 4 months into our 3rd year of marriage, it finally cracked. Ethan got into a minor car accident. No serious injuries, but he owed nearly $8,000 in damages. He called Sarah, not his parents, not his friends, Sarah, and she immediately turned to me, "Daniel, can you help him? My family can't cover this." I didn't answer immediately. I asked her instead, "Why am I responsible for this?" She hesitated, then said the sentence that snapped something inside me. "Because you're the man. You're supposed to take care of my family. Not our family. Not our responsibility. Not we'll figure it out together. Her family. Her bloodline. Her loyalty. Her comfort. Her priorities and me. I was the wallet that married in." That night I sat alone in my home office for 3 hours, scrolling through old bank transactions, adding up amounts I never should have paid. The final total made my stomach twist, over $45,000 in less than 3 years. And what terrified me most wasn't the number. It was the realization that if I didn't stop, they would never stop asking. It wasn't maliciousness. It wasn't cruelty. It was entitlement. Quiet, casual, deeply rooted entitlement. They didn't wonder how I felt. They didn't ask if we needed the money. They didn't care if Sarah and I had plans of our own. In their minds, the math was simple. Daniel earns money. Daniel can afford things. Daniel should pay. End of story. I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. And with that clarity came an equally clear decision. I was done. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge, just self-preservation. I wanted to see what would happen when the reliable provider turned off the tap. When the man they treated like an ATM finally stopped dispensing cash. I wasn't ready for just how quickly everything would explode, or how ugly people can get when the benefits stop flowing. But as I would soon learn, nothing reveals true character like the moment you say, no. Saying no sounded simple in my head, but I didn't expect it to hit the family system like a blunt force weapon. One refusal. That's all it took to expose a structure I had been blindly supporting for years. The next morning, I woke up early as usual, made coffee, and tried to pretend everything was normal. Sarah walked into the kitchen with the same storm cloud she carried from the night before. No good morning, no attempt to soften anything. Just that heavy silence you get from someone who isn't used to being denied. She asked only one question. "So, you're really not going to help Ethan?" I answered with one word. No, no explanation. No justification. No detailed speech. Just a clean, solid refusal that hung between us heavier than anything I had ever said to her. I watched her expression shift. It wasn't disappointment. It was indignation. That specific type of anger reserved for people who are used to getting what they want and suddenly find themselves powerless. Later that afternoon, the real campaign began. 3 missed calls from her mother. 2 from her father. 1 long text. "Daniel, this is a family matter. You can't turn your back like this." Then another. "Ethan is overwhelmed. You're the only one who can help." There. It was again that word, only not if you're able. Not if it doesn't inconvenience. It's just a blunt expectation wrapped in emotional pressure. It hit me harder than I expected. They never saw me as family. Just a reliable, renewable resource. A financial utility with a wedding ring. That evening, Sarah called for a family meeting in our living room. When I walked in, I saw Ethan sitting there with the practiced, pitiful look of someone who knew sympathy was his best currency. Her parents flanked him like lawyers preparing to present a case. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody acknowledged the years I'd been covering their emergencies. Nobody cared about our future, our plans, our savings. It was all about Ethan. He started with a shaky voice, the kind of trembling desperation you'd hear from someone who had rehearsed their lines in the mirror. "If you don't help, I'm going to lose everything." As if my refusal would cause the world to collapse around him, I let them speak. Let the performance run its full length. Then Sarah's mother said something that almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it revealed everything. "Daniel, you're the provider here. It's your responsibility, not their responsibility. Not Ethan's responsibility. Mine. They acted like my success was a public resource. Like the moment I married Sarah, my bank account became a community fund." Sarah joined in, her voice sharp with accusation, not fear. "You've changed. You were never this selfish." I looked at each of them. Ethan with his fabricated helplessness, her parents with their audacity, Sarah with her entitlement, and I finally said, "No one here has asked if I feel used. No one has asked about what this has cost us. All you care about is money and the fact that I'm the one who has it." Silence. Not because they disagreed, but because they knew I wasn't wrong. The family meeting collapsed right then. No agreement. No promises. Just a dead heavy tension that followed them out the door. But the night wasn't over. Sarah unleashed a storm of texts, long messages that grew more aggressive the more I ignored them. When guilt didn't work, she switched to blame. When blame didn't land, she tried emotional manipulation. And when all of that failed, she dropped the final threat. "If you don't help, I'll move back in with my parents. So I can't be with a man who doesn't support family." What she didn't expect was how little that threat affected me. Because for the first time, it hit me with absolute clarity. To her, I was never family. I was always just support. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt, but because I was finally thinking about myself for the first time in years. I saw the future clearly. If I kept giving, they would keep taking until there was nothing left of me except exhaustion. And quietly, without saying it yet, I made a decision. I was ready to let the entire system collapse. Because sometimes, you don't fix a broken household. You let it fall and you walk away from the rubble. Next morning, the entire house felt colder, like someone had turned winter on overnight. Sarah didn't speak to me, not out of sadness, but out of controlled anger. The kind of silence people weaponize when their entitled expectations stop being met. By noon, the real storm arrived. Her parents' car was parked in front of the house. No text, no call. Just an ambush wrapped in the excuse of family concern. They walked inside like they owned the place, sat down on the sofa without asking if I had time to talk, and carried themselves with the authority of people who fully believed I owed them something. Sarah stood behind them, not saying a word, like a judge waiting for the verdict she already knew she wanted. Her father started with the tone older men use when they think they're being wise, but are really just lecturing. "Daniel, you have to understand. Family is supposed to help each other. Ethan is struggling, and you should have been the first one to step up." There it was. Not concern, not compassion, Just pure entitlement dressed up as moral obligation. Her mother chimed in next with her usual guilt-infused disappointment. This isn't the time to be selfish. When someone in the family is hurting, we come together. We. A word they only used when they wanted me to pay for something. I sat there listening to a recycled script I'd heard 100 times over the years, speeches about loyalty and sacrifice, always conveniently forgetting how many times Ethan had burned through opportunities or how often I had been expected to fix his messes. When they finally finished, I gave them a simple, quiet answer. I've helped enough. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Sarah looked at me like I had personally betrayed her bloodline. But her parents, their eyes widened with something else, fear, because for the first time they understood the truth. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I thought that would be the end of it. But I underestimated Ethan. At around 3 in the afternoon, he showed up at the house. Didn't knock properly. Didn't ask if he could come in. He walked through the door like someone entering a room he'd paid rent for, even though the closest he'd ever been to responsibility was running away from it. He wasn't remorseful. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't even humble. He got straight to the point, voice full of dull resentment. If you're not going to help me, then you're basically tearing this family apart. A bold accusation, coming from a man whose entire adult life had been shaped by avoiding accountability. He saw nothing wrong with leaning on me for years. Nothing wrong with expecting me to bail him out again. Nothing wrong with assuming I existed to keep him afloat. The only problem in his eyes was that I finally said no. I stood up, looked him directly in the eyes, not with anger, but with clarity. Ethan, the only thing tearing this family apart is everyone expecting me to carry them. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. He didn't argue. He didn't yell, because deep down he knew I was telling the truth. He stormed out of the house like he was the wronged party. Aunt Sarah stared at me as if she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her anymore. But I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A lightness. A release. A freedom I didn't know I'd forgotten. And that peace lasted until later that night, when Sarah walked into the room, closed the door behind her, and said something that made me realize the real battle hadn't even begun yet. When Sarah walked into the dim room that night, I knew instantly that this conversation wasn't going to be like the others. No tears, no shouting. Just a cold, controlled calm, like she had already planned a script she expected me to follow. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, her expression a mix of fear and calculation. Finally, she said, "Daniel, if you don't help Ethan, my family won't survive this. And neither will I." A sentence crafted carefully, not meant for love, meant for manipulation. I stayed silent. She mistook my silence for hesitation. She stepped closer, her voice lower, almost like she was delivering a soft ultimatum draped in sweetness. "You're the only responsible one in this family. If you refuse now, I don't know if we can keep going." That was the moment I realized something crystal clear. It wasn't Ethan who needed me. It was her entire family, leaning on me as their permanent crutch. And Sarah didn't see my support as love. She saw it as an obligation, a resource she believed she had the right to demand. I asked her only one question: do you love me, or do you just love the stability I provide? It caught her off guard. Her eyes flickered, panic, then annoyance, then something close to truth, and then she answered, "I love stability. And you give that, honest, but brutally shallow, not love, not respect, just necessity." I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and said only one sentence: "Then you'll need to find that stability somewhere else." She broke down, but the tears weren't heartbreak. They were fear. Fear of losing the foundation she had built her comfort on. She tried one last time. "Daniel, you can't just walk away. What about us?" I turned back to her. There was never an us. It was just me carrying your family. She had nothing left to say. Everything collapsed faster than I expected. News traveled through her family in hours. My phone blew up. Her parents, her brother, for even distant relatives, every message was the same tone. "You're selfish. You're destroying the family. You have responsibilities. You're hurting Sarah." Not one of them asked how I felt. Not one acknowledged the years I'd carried their weight, paid the bills, cleaned up Ethan's disasters, or played the role of the adult they never bothered to become. The truth became painfully clear. I was never part of their family. I was just their safety net dressed as a boyfriend. I blocked every number. A week later, Sarah packed her things and moved out. No dramatic speeches. No real apology. Just one sentence before she closed the door. "You'll regret this." I didn't. I felt lighter than I had in years. Then everything returned to exactly where it belonged 3 weeks after the breakup. Ethan got fired. Too many absences while handling family emergencies. Her parents had to pick up his debts they always assumed I would handle. Sarah moved back home. And from what a mutual friend said, she's realizing stability doesn't magically exist. You built it and she lost it. As for me, I breathed for the first time in years. Started fixing my sleep schedule. Went back to the gym. Made plans that were actually mine. And the more distance I gained, the clearer the truth became. The only mistake I made was not saying no earlier.